What's up everyone, it's Q from Retro Q Gaming, and I want to talk about something that is pretty popular the last couple of months. Well, ever since the release of Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild on Wii U and Switch, although the Switch version is basically irrelevant to the conversation that we're about to have today. So we're really only going to focus on the Wii U version. And you probably already know exactly what I'm going to touch on, even if you didn't for some reason click in without reading the topic of the video. But it's surrounding the controversy basically about the CEMU Wii U emulator and its current state and its current development and the current processes around it and how it's being handled and all as well. So the main thing you're going to find is there's 2 or 3 different camps that you will find yourself when it comes to emulation. Now, straight away I'm gonna lay this out here as well, okay? In this video, I'm not giving my personal opinion on CEMU, my personal opinion on emulation, and I'm not going to get into if I support or am against CEMU or emulation. That's completely off the table. This is mainly about facts, legality, and what is and isn't okay as long as it's done a certain way or not done a certain way. Because as I said, there's a lot of information out there at the moment, most of which you will find is kind of accurate. It's accurate enough for the most part, but because of the nature of the sites you will find this on, usually Nintendo based sites, you kind of have a skewed perspective even from the actual quote journalist unquote. So you get my point where I'm coming from this. It's to be objective, it's to provide facts and legality side of it rather than the slightly skewed perspective that they can give even as their jobs for some reason that they have, and apparently that's a career. But anyway, my point doesn't really stand there. So let's get on to the main thing. So first off, CEMU is a Wii U emulator being developed for PC. It's currently still in development. It's an ongoing process and it's coming along. And especially lately, it's been getting some big publicity and some big highlights in the news and whatever you want to call it, because of its stellar performance and compatibility with specifically Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild on the Wii U. Now, yes, it does run and play other games, and it's not 100% perfect when it comes to Breath of the Wild, despite what some news outlets will incorrectly report to you. But the point is that it's made significant progress, even since its last version, since version 1.7.5. It's currently on version 1.8. Since the transition, even between those 2 versions, it has come a significant way. So that is a huge factor for a lot of people, to be able to play Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild on their PC with a proper frame rate, because yes, let's be real, it does fluctuate and struggle on the Wii U. So to be able to play it with a consistent, steady 30 FPS locked, there's 60 FPS is kind of questionable off the table at the moment, but that's beside the point, as well as being able to natively render in high resolutions. For example, the Wii U version natively renders at 720p. If you have a powerful PC, you can run it natively at 1080p, 1440p, or even solid 30 FPS 4K native. So you see the actual benefits to this and the actual importance of the hardware versions and what it can do as a PC emulator, basically, or as a Wii U emulator on a PC. So 99% of the time when you look in anything comment section or forum related or anything to CEMU rather than CEMU itself, naturally you have Nintendo fans left, right, and center saying, shut this down, I can't wait for Nintendo to get these people are profiting off Nintendo and Zelda and all this stuff. You get the point. Now, realistically, that is and isn't the case. So first off, I do want to explain that the team behind CEMU, they currently have a Patreon. And now this Patreon, which I will not include or link in any way, shape, or form, because people will get mad at that, and I'm not here to promote CEMU, I'm just here to give facts about the whole thing. One of the big points of contention for a lot of people is how much money the CEMU team is developing or is receiving in Patreon to develop the CEMU emulator. Now, as it stands right now, I opened the CEMU Patreon right before I started recording this video, so I'm looking at it right now, and currently it has 6,738 patrons and they're currently pledging or donating, or whatever way you want to word a Patreon donation, $28,759 per month. So that's a lot of money. There's no denying. Even when you divide that by 6,738 people, it's still a decent amount of money. I mean, it's more than a couple of euro a pop, but you get my point. So chances are some people are going to be donating significantly more, some are going to be donating significantly less. Now, the reason why this is important we'll get into a little bit later, but first off I want to talk about emulation and the misconceptions that many people have about emulators. So emulation as a whole is perfectly legal. Now, like many things in the world, things are perfectly legal, but what people tend to use them for and people do with them once they get them can be illegal. This is a very wild comparison, but it illustrates my point. It's in certain countries around the world, it's obviously perfectly legal to own a gun. It is not perfectly legal in one of those countries to use a legal firearm to rob a bank, to kill someone. You get my point. It seems very extreme, but the point is you can own something legally and do illegal stuff with it. On the flip side, you can own something legally and only use it for its legally intended purpose. So, you cannot say something like an emulator automatically is used for evil or wrong or piracy or whatever, because it's down to what the person actually uses it for. So as I said, emulation in many countries around the world is perfectly legal, and which also ties in with emulation, it's usually only legal in the sense that you must own the license to actually use what you own, or what you wish to emulate. For example, some emulators will only run off physical media. Now, some emulators will run off ROMs and downloaded ISOs and things like that, but some of them will only run off physical media, in which case you must physically own the product to actually use it. So you're already paying the license from whatever company, developer, publisher to use that software, and you can use that on your emulator. So again, that is also legal. Now, of course, there will be emulators out there that, as I said, use ROMs, use ISOs, read burn things. That's kind of beside the point, because that's not the main focus and intention of what these emulators are for. Now, like I said, realistically, people can and will use them for that, but at that point, you have to look at, well, everything else that can be used and acquired legally can be used for some illegal purpose. Anyway, I feel that covers that part of it. Now, another thing is, like, people are saying, oh, they're just copying a Wii U, they're trademarking, or they're copying trademarked and copyrighted product. This is not the case for several reasons. So, there's one extremely important thing that is involved when making your own emulator. So it's this arguably number one key important thing is how you do it. So let me give you an example. If you get a Wii U, if you buy a Wii U and you reverse engineer all that hardware by yourself, or at least in a team, and as long as you use no copyrighted code, no trademarked code, no copyrighted or trademarked BIOS, anything like that, as long as you reverse engineer it all yourself, and personally, or as a team, we'll count as a team personally, develop code, all brand new code from scratch to emulate what it does, or to create code that does the same thing differently. That may sound very similar to what I just said, but believe me, they're two different things when it comes to this. That is the key thing, because you are essentially creating your own console code at that point. You are not copying and using Nintendo hardware. You're not copying and using Nintendo software or code. Those are the very important things. There's also another important aspect that comes in tied to the same thing. Because if you reverse engineer it yourself and come up with it all from scratch, that's perfectly acceptable. However, if you are to download, let's say there's an official Nintendo leaked technical specs or hardware design document for the Nintendo Wii U. Let's say it's leaked or stolen from Nintendo or something. If you download that and work off that because you're basing it on Nintendo's official, whatever we call it, parameters, you're in trouble. But if you reverse engineer it and do it all yourself, which these guys are doing, is perfectly legal. It's perfectly fine because, again, you're essentially creating your own software, your own console OS, your own processes, your own everything from scratch. Now, I'll give you a perfect example of how this has worked in the past. Look at the Dolphin emulator. The Dolphin emulator, which runs on PC and is mainly used to play GameCube and Wii games on a PC at exceptionally better quality and frame rate, or more stability and frame rate, I should say, as well as having additional features and things like that, is obviously using its own fully designed from scratch code, which is why Dolphin has been around for years at this point. Its version 5.0 at the moment is currently amazing, and it cannot be shut down. Because once again, the guys who developed Dolphin, have done it from scratch. They reversed engineered both of these consoles and they built it from scratch based on all the work that they did to understand on how it all works. Because all of that, as I mentioned and explained why earlier, is perfectly legal. Now, another thing I want to talk about as well is the best way to look at what you can do with an emulator. Now, when I say what you can do, is not what the emulator can do with it. Is generally it is unacceptable to sell an emulator, because selling an emulator, specifically saying you are going to sell an emulator or that it will be developed with the intention of sale, that will get you shut down completely, because that is basically illegal as well. Now, having said that, the way CEMU are doing this, the way they're handling it with their Patreon, and that's the major ire of many people, and many people have a bad taste in their mouth because of the amount of money this team is receiving in Patreon funds to actually do this. So, I don't know if they're doing it like this on purpose, but if they are, they're doing it smart on their part. And they can also get around the legal ramifications and the legal aspect of it as well. So, because it's not legal to sell an emulator, and obviously on Patreon, you're not backing a product, and you're not pre-ordering a product, and you're not paying for a product, you're paying to support a creator or creators in this case, because I believe CEMU is a team, and you're paying for them to be able to do this, basically. Let me give you a couple of examples that Patreon can be used in different aspects in the same way that CEMU are currently using their Patreon, or at least they're currently using it in the official public sense. So the way it's done at the moment is basically, let's say you have a YouTube content creator. Now, I'm not going to say myself because my setup and production value is basically non-existent, but let's look at some of the ASMR community. Many of them use Patreon. And many of them, because of what they can do with this, many people obviously enjoy their videos, and what they will do is they will get support on Patreon, and they will use the money from Patreon to buy new props, better cameras, better microphones, to reinvest back into their, what we call their brand, their product, their videos, or audio, whatever way they release it in. That's one way of doing it. Another way of using Patreon is basically, let's say, I think this is the way the guys that at CEMU are using it, so I'll use them as an example. Let's say you make €300 a week. Now, I realize that's pretty low, it's below minimum wage, but let's just use that as a random number. And let's say they work, they work 40 hours a week, okay? So they work 40 hours a week, 5 days a week, and that's 8 hours a day. So realistically, they're obviously going to have a life. They come home, they need to get food, they might have another obligation, they might want to unwind for a little bit, and then maybe they only have 2 to 3 hours every night to work on the code, to work on improving CEMU and making it work. Obviously, if you can only put in 2 or 3 hours a day at coding, it's going to take significantly longer. So what can be done in cases like this is pledging to a Patreon basically allows them to cover their necessary expenses. So like I said, if they're making, let's say let's say there's 5 members of the team, and each of them is making €300 a week. That works out at €1,500 a week. So realistically, if they could raise €1,500 on Patreon donations per month, or per week, I should say. I'm sorry. I realize that would build up in a month, but let's just say per week. We break it down into a weekly basis. Then, in theory, they could quit their jobs because they're making the same amount of money, and they can use that money to cover their living expenses. And at the same time, because they're not in work or have less commitments now, they can code for maybe 8, 10, 12 hours a day. So progress on CEMU comes significantly quicker, as well as significantly more improvements, because obviously if stuff is happening quicker, it's being developed quicker, it's being fixed quicker, stuff is being added quicker. So you get the point. So that is how Patreon, I believe, these guys are using. And that is another use of Patreon. And like I said, I think this is the way that they're doing it. They're not using their what do we call it? They're not using the Patreon to drum up huge amounts of funds just because of it. Now, people can pledge whatever they want to a Patreon, not just their Patreon, but people can pledge whatever they want. People can pledge as little as $1. People can pledge up to, hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, whatever it is. So that the amount they're getting, as well as the amount of support they're getting in both financial amounts as well as supporter amounts, are completely irrelevant, if you ask me. Because it's not related to what most people equate it to. The financial support and huge number of actual support that they're getting does not equate to what they're doing. Because it's a misconception that a lot of people have with Patreon. And no, I don't have a Patreon, and I never will. But you get my point. And as I mentioned, people will cry about piracy and all that as well, which I've already stated like twice in this video at this point, that you can have legal and justified products and people will misuse them. It's not encouraging piracy just because people can pirate stuff. For example, I have a Nintendo Switch. I have a copy of Legend of Zelda for the Switch. I also have a copy of Legend of Zelda for the Wii U. Now, if I ever was to eventually download CEMU and eventually, maybe it runs better or runs perfectly or whatever, I can pop my disc in as it's intended to be done. Because that is the main aspect of how these things work. Pop the disc in, it reads it, and boom, it emulates what you have. Regardless of if you can pirate an ISO, you can pirate a ROM, you can pirate a disk image, that's not the point. Because what is the point is how these are designed and intended to be used. So I want to move on to the final point as well that most people make, and a lot of it is, they're profiting off. Obviously, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is a huge game in both critical acclaim, sales, as well as publicity and current level notoriety. So a lot of people are upset that they're using Zelda to promote CEMU, because obviously it is a giant promotion to be able to say, you can run Zelda at native 4K with solid 30 FPS. Because it's a big game. A lot of people want to play it. It's an amazing game. There's no doubt about it. So a lot of people are unhappy about that. And they say, they're using that to advertise. Nintendo can strike them down. Nintendo will smash them. They're infringing on Nintendo's trademark and IPs and all. This is not the case. Now, I'm going to give you a reason why that is, as well as a cause and or not a cause and effect, but I'm going to give you the reason and an extra effect on it as well. I'll also have a link to a video to a related topic in the comment section below, which actually deals with this specific subject and this specific topic I'm about to bring up now in a second, which I encourage you to read encourage you to view if you're interested in emulation and in this specific part as well. So the reason why they can get away with using the Zelda screenshots and they can run Zelda on their emulator and take native 4K screenshots or native 1080p or native 1440p screenshots, and the way they can actually use them is they're using a form of advertising, and it's called comparative advertising, which, as long as it isn't untruthful or deceptive, it is considered an important source of information for consumers. Now, I realize in this case, consumers is a is not really valid. It would be users, but technically users are consumers, but they're not paying for it. So you get the point anyway. And the big reason for that is that since comparative advertising is completely legal, as long, once again, as it isn't untruthful or deceptive, any effect of the advertising, the comparative advertising that these guys are using, any effect of that on the sales of the Wii U, which is obviously and arguably irrelevant at this point because it is a discontinued and unsupported legacy console now. So say the sales of the Wii U were to drop, which I don't think is possible to drop even lower, JK, it would actually be due to the emulator's technical and mechanical superiority, not due to the fact that they're using screenshots. So that's why they can get away with using that and without being sued and shut down, because so far everything they have done and the way they've all done it is completely above board. They're doing a perfectly legal service with a perfectly legal advertising means and drum up means, or whatever you want to call it. And as far as we know, the way they're actually doing it, with all the reverse engineering and all that, and not using any trademark BIOS or code, they're actually doing everything above board and everything legal. So there should be no problems whatsoever. Personally, I think CEMU will never be shut down. I think it will be completed, and I realize it's in development. It's currently version 1.8, so technically it is finished. It's just being upgraded. But my point is, I don't think Nintendo have a ground to stand on, because there are many legal factors which I pointed out in this video which these guys are adhering to. So essentially, despite your own personal moral objections and your own personal leaning on what they're doing with a brand or a franchise you love, because don't get me wrong, I love Nintendo and I love Zelda, but the point is, these guys are doing nothing wrong. Even if you're fanboy gut, that's not an insult, don't go crazy, but even if you're, well, it's called overwhelming fan desire or whatever, even if that says they are doing something wrong, legally they are not, and legally they are fine. So I feel like this has been a pretty informative video, and I'm happy with how it turned out. Let me know in the comments section below what you think about the whole CEMU situation, what you think about this video. Have I clarified anything for you? Have I been informative, or have I not been informative? Because I do welcome feedback. Anything about the entire situation, whatever, let me know all of that in the comment section below. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. You can follow me on Twitter, details in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the rest of the videos in my channel.